This is the secret story of Nutmeg.
But yeah, what an amazing story.
Yeah.
But, you know, I feel like by talking to you, for the first time, it's now out of my personal circle. It's gone out into the community circle.
Yes.
Where this story has been trapped. Not it was trapped in me, then it was trapped in my circle of people, you know?
For centuries, the seed of the Mystrica fragrance tree, nutmeg, also known as muscat, has been sought after by people all over the world for its perceived medicinal and magical powers. It has been called the spice of life, or the spice of kings. Thought to have cured the plague, have aphrodisiac qualities, and even cure flatulence, nutmeg was considered a symbol of wealth and status over thousands of years, instigating the birth of capitalism, globalism, and violent genocide and war. But why was this spice really so valuable? The answer may surprise you. Nutmeg's qualities and its story could be just what we need to cure our modern-day ailments. We want to explore its incredible history and the mystery that surrounds its real value to society over time. Welcome to the secret story of nutmeg, the mysteries and histories of a seed that shaped the world. I am online shopping for fresh nutmeg, fresh Grenadian nutmeg. Grenadian nutmeg is supposed to be pretty good. I'm also interested in the region because I keep getting texts from Trad. Each time a speedboat is blown up between Grenada and Venezuela by the US military, I get a text. Texts like this. Caribbean speedboats are being blown out of the water between Dragon's Mouth and Grenada. Trinidad and Tobago lie to the right of Venezuela. The opening to the body of water between Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago is known as the Dragon's Mouth. If these speedboats are transporting drugs to America, they're doing it from a strange place, Venezuela. More likely, the speedboats are coming from Grenada on their way to the mainland with the snookered prize, and the Yanks have had enough of their thieving activities. P.S. 1 drop of oil per 10,000 cans of Coke. This suggests a tiny bottle and could be worth a fortune. Have a good day, bro. It's like another riddle. The current flag of Grenada features 2 yellow triangles at the top and bottom, with 2 green triangles to the left and right. It is surrounded by a red border with 3 yellow stars at the top and 3 at the bottom, and a red disc with a larger yellow star in the centre. At the hoist side of the flag, in the left green triangle, is a yellow fruit, split and showing its red insides. It is a symbol of nutmeg, the yellow being the fruit, the red inside being the mace wrapping around the nutmeg seed. This is the only national flag in the world featuring a nutmeg. And the flag before this one, which was made official in 1974, was a horizontal tricolour of blue, yellow and green, with another, more realistic-looking nutmeg in the middle. The symbolism of the nutmeg to this country is important. Nutmeg is its most important crop. Grenada has been fought over by France, England, and in recent history, the US. It is called the Island of Spice. It symbolises the end of a monopoly on the spice by one group of people. and the end of its exceptional exclusivity to only those who could afford its exorbitant pricing structure, inflated first by its scarcity due to its location, and then by the wars between nations and companies of men. Wars that cost exorbitant amounts of money, resources, and worse, the lives of people. Some who were paid to be involved, but many, many, many more who were innocent. Like the Bandanese, inhabitants of the islands of Banda, the original home of Nutmeg, who, during the mad, seemingly perpetual and cynical fight between the nations of the Dutch and the English, as well as the corporate battle between the East India Company and the Dutch East Indies Company, were slaughtered in the 1600s. The Bandanese were more than collateral damage in the war between these factions. They were in the end taken out of the equation by the Dutch, who needed total control of the islands of Banda to secure for themselves the monopoly on nutmeg trade throughout the world. I just went through the thought again that for thousands of years, these people had managed to stave off any situation that would relinquish control of their homelands, for a spice that was sought after for so long. But I think it stands as a testament to trading in its purest form at a local level, where people know and trust one another, and no one entity is given too much power to monopolise too much for themselves. I probably sound like a hippie or a communist here. Maybe I'm a bit of both. But until the birth of these two extraordinary companies, which introduced modern capitalism and its profits at all costs doctrine, the Bandas and their product, nutmeg, seem to have survived intact. However, I don't know this. I don't know the full story from this part of the world prior to Portuguese arrival. Who were these people? Were they indigenous to the islands? Were they the products of prior war and occupation, of generations of conflicts themselves, of multiple occupations, multiple colonisations over centuries before they were cruelly disposed of for their spice? What we do know is that when the Portuguese arrived in 1512, they refused for the Portuguese to stay, allowing them only to fill their ships with nutmeg, mace and cloves, of which they themselves had an entrepot trade, and when the Portuguese returned 17 years later, they again refused an attempt for them to try and set up a permanent settlement. The Portuguese were kept at bay, and they found it easier for them to continue to just stay in Malacca and trade for nutmeg there. Obviously, the Bandanese were fierce enough to hold this powerful nation at bay. They likely understood over the centuries that they had their own monopoly and when to defend and when to negotiate. The Bandanese were organised not by being one nation or kingdom with one ruler, as in other parts of the region where sultanates were the norm, but a conglomerate of people with dozens of leaders. We now know were called orang kaya, which literally means rich people. Essentially, they were the wealthy merchant leaders of each village, who could and would organise together when needed. As a merchant oligarchy, in effect, they were well aware of the need to trade, to negotiate, and when to protect. They had a council that made trade agreements regarding the prices at which nutmeg could be fixed, so that no island or group would ever undercut anyone else. It was a stable economy. The Bandas themselves grew little more than nutmeg. It was their sole trading asset. They have just been masterful traders and negotiators up to the point that the pointy end of unadulterated European greed and power hit their shores. And what a fiasco that ensued after the English and the Dutch arrived. I've just finished reading the Giles Milton novel, Nathaniel's Nutmeg, described in the New York Times Book Review as a rousing historical romp, a tale of courage, treachery, endurance, cowardice, and greed. And that is also how I would describe the next 70 years in Nutmeg's story. Nathaniel in the title is Nathaniel Courthope, an English East India Company officer who, for 4 years, defended the island of Run with a small band of English crew and locals against being taken by the Dutch. The Dutch East Indies Company sought control of the entire Bandas. The East India Company also wanted their piece of the pie, and the island of Run was the only piece left that Nathaniel Courthope and his crew could occupy and defend. In a way, Run was the runt of the islands in the Banda chain. It was almost inaccessible. Its harbour was very small, and the rest of the island was surrounded by rocky shores and reefs, with no water on the island at all. Courthope sailed from England with specific instructions from King James I to hold some part of the Bandas to keep the Dutch from monopolising the nutmeg trade. His 2 ships were destroyed when he arrived, one by the Dutch when looking for supplies, and the other was mysteriously cut off its moorings and drifted away. Courthope and his men had taken a few cannons off the 2 ships beforehand, and so they built fortifications and batteries around Run, and there they sat for 4 years, defending the nutmeg, defending the little island for the King of England. By the way, Trad tells me the nutmeg from the island of Run is the one true nutmeg. Because of its isolation from the other islands, it's about 10 kilometres away. Trad tells me that the nutmeg there evolved differently, and the Mistresson oil within the nutmeg from the Isle of Run is a lot stronger than the other nutmeg.
Its qualities are far greater, you know what I mean?
Yep. So because of the isolation of Run compared to the other islands,
Yeah.
it evolved differently or slightly
It evolved differently, yeah. It evolved differently, mate. It evolved with different qualities compared to the other trees, you know? And they were far more pungent, you know, far stronger. It was, that was the one with the value. Yeah.
Do you think the Dutch knew that?
Yeah, I reckon they did, but, you know, Run was an island that was difficult to sort of even locate, let alone get to, because it was far away from all the other islands, you know what I mean? And so it wasn't well known sort of thing, you know, where it was, because of, I guess, you know, all the other islands were close by. You could, you know, sail out and run into one of them. But Run's the one that's way out to the west. It sits out there on its own, you know what I mean?
Yep.
And so I reckon that was, the secret was kept for, you know, it's right down to the end.
Yep.
The last island was, you know, still a secret. You know what I mean? The last true island was still a secret, you know? Even the Dutch who were there, and the locals would bring it to them, but the Dutch still know it. The English only found that island because they got shipwrecked there. Daniel got shipwrecked onto the island, yeah. Otherwise they wouldn't have found it either, probably. Yeah. Its qualities are far greater, you know what I mean? It's the magic one.
I don't have any evidence of this, but this is what Trad tells me. I like the idea, and we'll explore it later. Anyway, the Dutch East Indies Company, commonly called the VOC, whose real name I'll try now to pronounce, Vereniging Oost-Indische Company. I'm so sorry to anybody from the Netherlands. I won't try that again. The VOC was building its presence in the East Indies, which we now call Indonesia, at a rate far faster and more powerfully than the English and any other traders looking to establish themselves. It seemed that each trip they took to the Spice Islands, they made a shit ton of money. Remembering the Portuguese paved the way for both the English and the Dutch, for the Dutch it was now a matter of taking the routes themselves and exploiting as much as they could. The first in really was the best dressed now. The Dutch were the leading shipbuilders in Europe. Some suggest that because of the structure of sponsorship for the Portuguese expeditions, Relying on funding from the king, he always wanted bigger and bigger ships that looked more powerful than his enemies, but in the end they were less manoeuvrable, and because they could be loaded up with so much cargo, they became extremely unsafe in storms. They were slower and often had to wait the winters out in Mozambique on the way home. The Portuguese technology allowed them to find the Spice Islands, and now they were superseded by the Dutch, who had become the master shipbuilders of Europe. Their ships were faster and more manoeuvrable, with one such ship, the East Indiamen, becoming the ships of choice for both the VOC and the British East India Company. The East Indiamen were good ships, fast, large enough for a good cargo, but not too large they couldn't fight a good fight at sea when required. And the Dutch had found another advantage as well, a new route. Simple and courageous, a route that would change the world. After rounding the Cape of Good Hope, the Dutch had found a new way east, which today seems so normal, but no ship ever used it until Hendrik Brewer in 1611. The new route essentially utilised the Roaring Forties, strong westerly winds that occur between the latitudes of 40 and 50 degrees, just below the Cape of Good Hope, which pushed them east at a rapid pace. Not the usual run up the African coast across to India and then east, a trip that took 12 months. The Dutch, using the new route, cut this in half. It became a 6-month trip. I know those winds intimately. My island of Tasmania, named after a Dutch commander, sits smack bang in the middle of them. We have just had 2 weeks of 100 km/h winds. They do blow. This new route, as you can imagine, is a significant advantage. The Dutch were getting there twice as fast as anybody else, which means they needed half the provisions, therefore it was obviously a lot cheaper, and fewer crew members died on the way. Of the things you could die of on the way to the source of spice, there were almost too many to mention. But pick up that book I mentioned earlier, Nathaniel's Nutmeg, for some graphical descriptions of death by the flux, infections of wounds, infectious diseases, falling off riggings, falling off the ship, being killed, killed in fights, killed in battle, killed by execution, killed by wild animals. There were many, many ways to die, but by far the biggest killer of crew members on all vessels was scurvy. Simply caused by a lack of vitamins, scurvy sometimes claimed up to 60% of ships' crews. At that time, to reach the East Indies as quick as you can and eat fresh fruit was likely to save a lot of lives. So it appears the Dutch had a distinct advantage over everyone for 10 years. Then the English picked up on it too. 1620. They tried it a couple of times, lost a ship, and they didn't use it again for 20 years. It's no wonder poor old Nathaniel and his men were stuck on Run by themselves for so long, as more and more Dutch ships arrived and basically pushed the English and Portuguese almost completely out of the area. And the Dutch East Indies Company was ruthless in its quest to secure control. The more I read, the more I get saddened by the brutality of their efforts at this time. So much so that I now, after reading all that I've read so far, gasp at my spice shelf as I flick through the packets and see the words Dutch cinnamon, for example. I don't even know the cinnamon story. I can't even imagine the horrors. I used to think the Dutch grew cinnamon, which is why it was called Dutch cinnamon. But at least I know better now. By the way, I just read the other day, speaking of such, in some parts of the world, nutmeg is known as muscat. And people used to think nutmeg came from Muscat in Oman near the mouth of the Persian Gulf. probably the first port outside of the east where spices arrived. This was when the Arab traders kept the location a secret for so long. Anyway, but I do know a bit about the Dutch nutmeg story, and it ain't pretty. So the Dutch East Indies Company, with their ever-growing advantage, started to build forts on the Banda Islands, mostly occupying Banda Nera. There were other islands, 11 to be exact. Some of the islands' names are Banda Besar, Pulau Ai, Rosengane, now called Hatu, and of course Palau Run. Palau means island, but Banda Nera had an extremely sheltered harbour between it and Banda Api. Banda Api is also a volcano, an extremely active one, known as Gunung Api. Apparently this volcano erupted when the Dutch first arrived. It was a bad omen, and was taken as such. The volcano was the source of the rich soils of the Bandas. This, combined with the sea air and the monsoonal rainy season, is what makes Bandas a unique growing environment for nutmeg. Gunung Api was important to the Wandanese. That's right, you heard me, not the Bandanese. To be fully correct, these people were called the Wandanese. They were Wandan. They spoke a language called Wandan. Their stories were in Wandan, and their story was nearly erased by the Dutch, as many colonisers want to do. All for their pala. And that is the local name for nutmeg. From where it comes from, the area of Nusantara, what the Javanese call the outer islands, where the Banda Islands lie. For over 4,000 years, the people traded pala, freely traded pala, with people from China, India, Persia, Arabia, and others. In that time, no one ever told them with whom and to where they could trade. There was respect. The respect kept them secret. The secret kept them safe. But now, as the Dutch arrived and Gunung Api erupted in anger, the Wandan were about to be disrespected for maybe the first time in history. There is so much detail around what happened next. It's gruesome, it's sad. When the Dutch arrived, they sought to establish a monopoly on the nutmeg trade. They told the Wandans they could only sell pala to them, and if they were caught trading with anyone else, whether Malay, Chinese, Portuguese, and most definitely the English, there would be trouble. The Dutch East India Company had been granted exclusive rights to all Dutch navigation and trade in Asia and East Indies. To achieve this, they were empowered to conclude treaties, declare war, wage war, and establish fortresses and trading posts. Just remember, these exclusive rights were granted to them by themselves. They wanted a fortress on Banda Nera, and they wanted restricted trade to only them. The Orang Kaya, and rightly so, didn't feel that these were fair negotiations, and in May 1609 they killed around 40 Dutch guards and commanders. The Dutch went on a rampage and ransacked several villages and destroyed all their boats. Their retribution was swift. It was only the beginning, but it was enough for the Orang Kaya to agree to their terms, officially. But of course the Orang Kaya traded to others whenever they could. Why should they stop now? The VOC built their first fort, Fort Nassau, in Banda, the first foreign fort ever in the region. Meanwhile, the locals were trading as usual with everyone they used to, violating the Dutch orders. And when the VOC's Board of Governors, named the 17, heard this back in the Netherlands, the orders went out that this was enough and that the whole of the Bandas needed conquering. And if needs be, the local population needed to be exterminated for the sake of nutmeg. The pala that had been the lifeblood of the Wandan for eons was now a curse. And now the English had also arrived. The Orang Kaya requested that the English make their presence felt, for anything was better than the terms the Dutch were offering. And the English were looking for a foothold in the Bandas. They fought with the Dutch over the islands of A and Run. One surprise attack in A killed 200 Dutchmen. The Dutch retaliated and drove the English back to Run, whilst also massacring any local wander in their path. It is said that 400 local people died trying to swim from A to Run, where the English had retreated. All this was happening, mind you, as officially back home the Dutch and the English weren't even enemies yet. Remember, these companies were permitted to engage in wars with whomever they pleased in order to secure trade, and fight they did. The English tried hard, but the accumulation of Dutch arrivals arriving faster and in greater numbers was like pushing shit uphill. The English had retreated to Paluron and had to wait for help from England on the other side of the world. To be sieged there on this island with no food, with virtually no water, with no hope. But these 39 men held on for over 4 years, with the Dutch launching repeated attacks to claim the whole of the archipelago for themselves. And the people of the Bandas were now caught in the middle, and the Dutch were about to send a big signal to them that they were in charge and the nutmeg was theirs. Honestly, reading accounts from books like Nathaniel's Nutmeg and Amitav Ghosh's The Nutmeg Curse, Wikipedia, countless online articles, published papers, historical essays, etc., on the ensuing years of spice wars in the Bandas and the Greater Moluccas and now the Indonesian archipelago all at once make me feel sick and sad inside with the futility of the situation for the people of the Bandas, all for the sake of their nutmeg. The players in this were the Dutch East Indies Company, the VOC, their ever-increasing fleet of vessels, soldiers and mercenaries, some of whom were Japanese samurai, recruited for their efficiency in killing. Because of the presence of the English and the dwindling presence of the Portuguese, the VOC had more reason to clamp down quickly to secure the monopoly. However, I wonder, if the English weren't there, would the VOC have acted as they did? The orders came from the top, the 17, who were essentially the board, and the instructions were carried out. Like the yes men of today, carrying out corporate missions without hesitation, without consultation, without question. I had it in my mind to keep these men faceless and nameless, for the reason that we do not know the names of the people who were slaughtered unless they were European, and that doesn't seem fair. Thousands of nameless local people killed by men with names. Fuck their names. You can find them all yourself. So how do we tell this story? This tit-for-tat, paranoia-driven, wanton lust for control, for riches, for some twisted, perverse satisfaction of getting it done. The slaying of nearly every single local person in the Banda Islands for complete control of the nutmeg market was also fueled by religious hatred, I would argue. A 17th century crusade. A Calvinistic Christian crusade against the Muslim population. The Dutch governor, the chief instigator of the coming massacres, wrote, "Despair not, spare not your enemies. There is nothing in the world that can hinder or harm us, for God is with us. And do not draw a conclusion from the preceding failures, because there, in the Indies, something grand can be accomplished." Sounds a bit like a crusade to me. And the Holy Grail? Nutmeg. Also, the Wandon's poison chalice. So, the VOC mounted a full-scale invasion of the biggest island in the Bandas, Lontor, attacking villages on several fronts. The Orang Kaya requested peace, and the VOC then started building more fortresses. Now, of course, again, the local people resisted. Wouldn't you? Wouldn't you if your land was invaded? Wouldn't you resist? To the powers that be, in this case, the VOC, this was terrorism. And they were terrified. Of course they were. Long dark nights in strange lands surrounded by people that hate you for what you are doing to them, to their culture, to their livelihood, to their families, their children, their wives, their sons, their daughters. After a while, these skirmishes, these acts of resistance were taking their toll on the VOC, and they captured most of the Orang Kaya and their families, nearly 800 families. They interrogated and they extracted confessions about conspiracies against them. 24 Orang Kaya elders were decapitated by the Japanese samurai mercenaries, and the rest were deported with their families to Batavia, the VOC's headquarters where Jakarta now stands. They were enslaved there. Then the VOC fought and murdered thousands of islanders of Lonton, and systematically the other islands as well. Historians have estimated that in total 15,000 people of Banda were killed, 90% of the population. The people of the Banda Islands didn't go quietly though. They fought when they could. Wouldn't you? This gigantic metaphor raises its head again. We see this time and time and time again. This repeating process of colonisation. Hell, I live on an island with a very similar story, an attempted genocide. And here, it was only for grass to feed the sheep. Too many times we see this happen, colonisation, genocide. We watch it on our news still every night. Trade has made us technologically advanced, improved many people's way of life, sometimes enhanced cultures, sometimes opened our minds. But it's like a two-headed snake. It's our light, it's our shadow, it's our poison apple. We can't live with it, we can't live without it. But we could try harder to do better. So, after all the murdering and taking what was not rightfully theirs, the VOC had nearly everything sewn up for themselves in this far-flung land from their own. And they got greedy. Well, if they weren't already. And they had the nutmeg, and now they wanted to secure the cloves market too. And there were a few English in their way in Amboina to the north of the Bandas. Why am I telling you this? Because the paranoid VOC commanders in Amboina believed that there was another conspiracy going on there, and they tortured and cruelly executed a bunch of English East India Company workers, Japanese and Portuguese merchants in 1623, and this massacre was felt all the way back to England. The British East India Company was furious and demanded that the families of the victims get compensated. Rumours of this event reached the English public through pamphlets outlining the gruesome details of the treatment of the men, put to the rack, burnt with flames, water tortured, stabbed, and even having their arms and legs blown off with gunpowder before being beheaded, with the English captain's severed head being impaled on a pole for the villagers to see. This event played a role in starting the First and Second Anglo-Dutch Wars, the Second War finally ending in 1667 with the Treaty of Breda. And why is this important? Well, because this is the treaty. This is the treaty that saw this island, the island of Run, traded with the Dutch, even though they were holding it to ransom for the island of Manhattan. which coincidentally the English had already invaded and were holding for themselves. So the Dutch were sitting on the island of Run, which was owned by the British, and the British were sitting on the island of Manhattan, which was owned by the Dutch. The Manhattan Transfer, as it was to be known, made it official. New Amsterdam was now known as New York. There were, of course, other territories in the Treaty of Breda, but this one seems the most symbolic and the most metaphorical. The Big Apple was traded for the island of the Golden Apple, as Trad calls it. And you know, the funny thing is, the island of Manhattan sits in the Hudson River, a river named after an English commander of a Dutch East Indies expedition in 1609, an expedition to find a new route through the Americas to get to the Banda Islands. And so the Dutch now had it all, every part of the Bandas, and a virtual monopoly on Pala, Muscat, Nutmeg, for nearly 200 years. Except for a brief period in the early 1800s, when England again seized the islands and took nutmeg seedlings to its new colonies in Penang and Singapore. And also for the fact that a wily French one-armed botanist named Pierre Pauvoir, Peter Pepper, pinched some seeds and plants in a clandestine operation under the VOC's noses and took them to Mauritius and Reunion Islands, where they still grow today. And finally, Grenada became a major producer of nutmeg when it was introduced there by the British, who had taken it over from the French, who had acquired it from the Caribs, who took it from the indigenous Arawaks. It gained independence in 1974 and was subsequently invaded again by the United States. And despite being a Commonwealth country, England did nothing to stop it. Perhaps they'd had enough of protecting small nutmeg-laden islands over another ideological battle. The US claimed Grenada would become communist if they didn't invade. I just received a text from Trad. It reads, "Put simply, nutmeg is humanity's holy grail, our healer, our redeemer, and our saviour from all the ills of humankind. And it also acts as our fountain of youth, building immortality with health in mind and then body, plus the enormous wealth and power that comes from its monopolization. It also gives us great bravery on the battlefield, as the Germans knew all too well, and without it, we shall surely perish and die. Back to the animal kingdom we shall go. Most animals have some degree of empathy. Nutmeg's boost released us from the other animals' fight or flight mechanisms. With our gained greater degree of empathy, we now had a say in whether to stay and fight or hit flight because of our reduced degree of fear. Ecstasy reduces our fears, which in turn makes us brave. Bravery or courage in adversity builds great fortitude, which in turn builds our resilience to the external world. I'll try photocopy the pages of Thick Owl so you can read Alexander's story of Nutmeg's escape from Grenada. Today they use speedboats to aid its escape from its entrapment a long way from home. It all began with the Pax of Rome, to Pax Britannia, to Pax Americana, and soon Pax Sino will be upon us. Control of our trade routes is the key to control." As I read this, I realise the enigma continues. It will take a while to get to the bottom of all of this. another text. And do not forget, knowledge of nutmeg's power in our history has the ability to collapse religions of its power over us for all time. It's finally known and appreciated. Have a good day, bro. I'm off to church. Lol. Oh, and by the way, I found out where those satyrs were on that ancient Roman map. But we've run out of time. This episode was far too long. This is the secret story of Nutmeg.